Speaking of title insurance, I wanted to hear you tell that story because I was like, what's title insurance cost? Like $1,000? That's what it does for in Indiana. I was like, how many times does the title company actually mess up and actually have to use the title insurance? Have you ever had that happen?
We're not some Joe, not some average Joe can basically go sign up and become a title company or an escrow company. You have to be licensed. You have to get audited. You have to do all this financial proof stuff. So that way someone can't just send you money for a deal and then you turn around and like, that money is gone. I spent it for something or whatever, that money is essentially safe.
The DealMachine REI Podcast. Everything you need to know to get started in real estate investing.
Can you explain what is escrow and what is the escrow officer's role?
Sure. So escrow is just the sort of fancy name, I think, of the people who are the independent middleman or third party in a transaction, right? So legally speaking, it's our job to make sure that the contract is executed the way the contract states. So the buyer does their responsibilities, the seller does their responsibilities, which can include everything from making sure a survey has been ordered, or making sure that the seller provides all the information we need in order to clear liens, et cetera. So that's sort of people call it escrow companies or title companies. It's very interchangeable. In certain states, there's sort of two sides of the same coin. But all that really means is if you call it title, it means it's the guys who are doing the title search, and escrow are the guys who are actually doing the closing part of it. But yeah, so they're both two sides of the coin on that side. Escrow is generally considered the guys who are doing the closing part of it, and the title is considered the people who are clearing the liens and validating the liens on that side. You generally won't interact with anyone besides the escrow team. That's who you're going to talk to. And your escrow officer is a fully licensed individual in the vast majority of states, especially Texas and California, New York, Florida, these big places that people play a lot in. It's a fully licensed person, and they're responsible for being sort of your point of contact throughout that entire process. And making sure everything runs smoothly, essentially. They're the experts when it comes to title and all those kinds of things.
So I didn't encounter the word escrow until I did my first real estate deal, but I also realized escrow is not only a real estate term. I actually bought a domain name and I used an escrow company, and it was a third party that was holding my money, because if I just wired the person the money, they could run off with my money and never give me the domain name. So it's like a third party who holds the money, and then the person gives me control of the domain name. And then the third party's like, okay, everybody's happy. Now I will release the money.
Yes. And that's a great example of, if you think about the parallel to real estate, is you're not going to send $100K, whether it's you or a lender that you're working with, a hard money lender or whatever, to the seller and hope they sign the deed and hope they record the deed and all those kinds of things and it's all right. You send it to us. We hold that. We make sure everything's done correctly. And then when we close, then funds go to whoever they're supposed to go to. The deeds are recorded. All those kinds of things are done properly. And then, it's one of those things where it's heavily audited. There's a lot of legal work that goes into sort of what the states do and stuff. And it's a little bit of structure, but the good thing there is that we're not some Joe, not some average Joe can basically go sign up and become a title company or an escrow company. You have to be licensed. You have to get audited. You have to do all this financial proof stuff. So that way someone can't just send you money for a deal and then you turn around and like, that money is gone. I spent it for something or whatever, that money is essentially safe.
Ryan, that was a really good point about that line to put in the contract. Why don't you hit us with some more buzzwords that are title related?
One thing that I want to know, I get a lot of questions from people about, hey, would you ever be interested in tax sale properties? Personally, I've never been one to go for a tax sale property because they have so many issues with title. When you're buying a tax sale property or you're going to the courthouse, you're essentially buying a property for what the back taxes are. But do you really get the property?
So no, that's a great question, right? Because there's sort of like an order of priority, right? And the government sort of, as you can imagine, always has sort of first priority. So you don't pay your taxes, they're going to repossess the property, they're going to foreclose the property. The issue you run into is you're basically you're trying to take on title onto that property by paying whatever the outstanding tax amount might be, but there could be a bunch of other things associated with it. So let me give you sort of an example. Let's say you got a $150,000 home and it's got $25K in outstanding taxes. So you pay $25K and you think, man, I just got this home for $150K for $25K, right? But the reality is there's still an outstanding lien. There may still be an outstanding lien associated with the mortgage company, and the mortgage might be $100K. There could be other liens associated with it. And so you really want to check those things and validate those things before you know if you're going to take on that tax sale, right? Because those things aren't paid in that $25K, right? So let's just say the lender had $75,000 left on that loan, and the city came in foreclosing the property, and they basically got to it before the lender did. You still have to pay that lender because they have the right to foreclose on the property again and take it over and do that. So there's pieces of that you want to be clear about, and there's always a question too if someone comes back and says, "Hey, that was my property, and I was not receiving the tax notifications for it, and I didn't realize that the taxes were up. I am ready to pay the taxes and any outdated fees, late fees, etc. to it, and reclaim my property." Now, it's not an easy thing because it's all situational, and what ends up happening in these things is you fight it out in court, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it might, so if someone comes back 10 years later, the courts might be like, well, it's too late, but if someone comes back 5 months later, it's like, okay, and you can prove that you moved and the stuff didn't get sent to you and you didn't know that, whatever. They might say, okay, we're going to force a sale of the property and then we're going to give it back to that person or whatever. So it can
really
be dangerous.
Tax sale could be maybe like a long-term investment, because from what I understand on tax sale is you pay the back taxes, and then after so long, how do you get the title?
So you effectively are granted title through the state at that point, but it's not a clean title, if that makes sense, right?
You couldn't sell it.
Well, what happens is there's a deed that you have signed by the state or the county that gives it to you. It says, hey, Ryan, you own this now. But when you go to sell it, there's going to be title examination done on it. And there might be problems then, right? There might be an issue that says, hey, look, there's outstanding liens on this, or there's something else, or there's a hair ship thing or whatever. And the title company will say, yeah, you can sell this, but we won't provide title insurance to the buyer until you clear all these issues, right? And so you then are stuck in a situation where you have to say, I got to clear all these issues. And some of them might be fine. Some of them might be just pay somebody something and you don't mind, but some of them might be more difficult associated with that. So that's where you get into it, right? So if you're going to get a tax property, be prepared for the fact that, hopefully it's a really good deal. And then you can get title company to do, an examination for it and tell you like, here's all the issues. Let's go get this figured out. Cause you might be spending 6 months, refurbishing the property. Well, you can need to go get all that sorted out and taken care of, because when you go to sell it, the buyer is ultimately going to want title insurance. And especially if they have a lender. So and hopefully everybody knows, traditional lenders will always require title insurance. So you can't skip that part. So in order to get those things, you have to clear all the issues associated with it.
Okay. Ooh, speaking of title insurance, I wanted to hear you tell that story because I was like, what's title insurance cost? Like $1,000? That's what it does for in Indiana. I was like, how many times does the title company actually mess up and actually have to use the title insurance? Have you ever had that happen?
I've had it happen. Luckily, we're glad to say we've actually had 0 claims against us. So that's just, something I throw out there. But here's what I tell people about that and what happens. Let me give you a story I think is easiest. Is we used to work with an iBuyer, and we still do. But, iBuyers, if you guys know, they purchase the property, they turn it around and they flip it, kind of similar to investors, but they don't do any work, right, associated with it. So what was interesting was The iBuyer purchased a property with the title company that was a different title company. 3 months later, they found a buyer, they're flipping it, and they're selling it. And we look at it and we say, hey, there's an outstanding lien on this from the previous owners for like $50,000 for their home equity loan. And so we contact, and sometimes when things happen quickly, especially for investors and iBuyers and such, when you have only a couple months, the lenders might have not at that point processed the payoff and got that recorded. So it could be a legit thing. So we contacted the previous title company and we said, hey, did you guys pay this off? And their response was, yes, we did. Here's proof that they basically issue a letter that says, we accept responsibility that we have paid this off. We're confident that's there. Turns out they didn't. They messed up. So 6 months later, we get a call from the new owner saying, hey, I got a letter that they're foreclosing on me because this was never paid off. So in this scenario, this is a perfect example of why a buyer wants that title insurance is they were protected by our title insurance, and our title insurance had sort of what they call the default associated with this on the previous title company. So our lawyers come in, they put a halt on the foreclosure sale, so they make sure that doesn't happen. And then they go back to the previous title company and whoever made the mistake in that scenario, and they make them pay for whatever's there as an outstanding thing. So the buyer doesn't lose the house. The buyer doesn't pay anything. Yes, it's a hassle. It's a little bit of a pain, but sometimes you can't avoid those things. But at least you've got a lawyer, experienced lawyers that come in that deal with it for you, those kinds of things. So that's where these situations end up. And there are definitely some situations where you can even get criminal stuff, right? We had one where this was actually a friend of mine that did this a couple years ago. He bought a plot of land out in the middle of nowhere in Texas for like $1 million, and someone forged a signature on a deed and basically tried to take over the ownership of the property. If you didn't have title insurance, the situation would have been, I got to go figure all this out. I got to go hire a lawyer. That's going to be very expensive and all these kind of things. But when you have a title insurance, you just tell the title company, hey, this happened. And they'll be like, all right, cool. We'll go figure this out for you, right?
Wow.